Hey everybody. So welcome back to another episode with the Matadoras. Lizzie and I have a really fun one for you today. We are meeting with our kids, several of our kids, so that we can ask them questions that, we've had you ask us. And we thought, what a better source than straight from the horse's mouth. So we wanted to introduce them first. I would like to introduce Garrett.
Hi, I'm Garrett.
All right. And Zach is here too.
Hi, I'm Zach.
And Jordan.
Hi, I'm Jordan.
And so we just want to, like I said, give them a chance to talk about their experiences, and we'll just see where the conversation goes. We're going to let it be a little bit organic. So for starters, I don't know who would like to speak up first, but we really want to talk about what it was like to grow up in a home where you had a parent that had narcissistic or, any kind of mentally abusive types of tendencies, and what that experience was like. A lot of parents feel tremendous guilt because they stayed with their partner for a long time, and they felt like, with making that decision to stay, their kids had to take a lot of the brunt of, the hurt and pain and manipulation and all the things that went on. And so, we're going to ask the question at the end, if these boys feel like, staying would have been the better option. And just, again, these are all opinions, but we thought it would just be great to hear kind of their experience and what they felt. So whoever would like to start, the first question that I had was, describe what it was like growing up in a home with your dads.
Well, I only had one, so that's a different family. Um, it's hard to, I guess I'll go first. It's hard to look at what our experience is and compare it to what's considered normal or what's supposed to be considered normal or what other kids would consider toxic. It's all such a relative situation. So just personally, there was definitely a very clear feeling that one of our parents, in our case, our mother, was the protector of the children, and one was the accuser. You can almost apply it to a religious type of mythology where there's an accuser and then there's like a protector kind of thing. So that part was very clear. Whether how amplified that is in other families and in other situations, that's a question to be asked. But from what I remember looking back, it was very clear. There wasn't dual roles like, oh, there's a protective and a disciplining aspect of the dad, and a same with the mom. It seemed to be very, very, a binary type of system: protect, accuse. So that rings pretty loud to me when I think back of what was going on. So just to start that off.
Yeah, it's also hard because I think a lot of times, like, we weren't beat horribly. There wasn't meth in the house. There wasn't. So, like, it's hard to even feel like a victim sometimes until you start to see things unravel when you're later in life. You're like, oh, there was a lot of stuff going on that because when you're living in it and you're surrounded in it, it doesn't feel abnormal. It just feels like what life is. And so I think some people would say like, oh, what would you do? You had a, emotionally abusive parent, but at least you had both parents. So like something like that is also, like Garrett said, it's pretty relative, but it doesn't negate like how much it definitely messed us up. Especially now retroactively, how much manipulation and emotional, it's just exhausting was, I think, probably the best. Just trying to always make sure he was happy. And when he was happy, everyone was happy. And we were, doing, and then it would turn like in a second. And then it was like, oh, kind of turtle up. But yeah, it is relative for sure.
Well said. Zach, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with both what you said, Garrett and Jordan. It is relative. I can't say I'm like the best parent or jack of all trades, but you kind of see looking back some of the tendencies or behaviors that you could never imagine yourself doing now, as a parent. So, I'm very thankful that I had my mom during those hard times, because I feel like without a rock, which was our mom, we would have been in a very sticky situation. As my aunt would describe it, she said this one time that if we didn't have our mom, then we probably would have been those religious kids going from door to door, talking about our message, which we would have never really had our own message for ourselves. So, um, really coming down to like, I didn't have the exposure that some people may have had with their father. He kind of like left when I was 5. So, um, it's a little different, but at the same time, you really did notice just during those times, there was some behaviors that were just not very, very appropriate. So,
And
sorry.
so for yeah, and so for the listener, with Zach and my boys, they were raised in a very religiously abusive home, but it's still emotional abuse. But yeah, that's what he was kind of referring to, is the fact that people people have said before, not just his aunt on his dad's side, but on other people as well, that if he had stayed in that type of abuse, he probably all 4 of my kids would probably be just slightly, I don't want to say odd, because what does
Just
odd look like, right?
we're lost,
Mm.
like we're someone else wrote our story. We didn't get to write our own story. Whereas like we had that freedom in my mom's household, whereas in Steven's, my father, he didn't have that freedom in his household. He would have written our story. He would have made sure we followed the rules without walking any other way. So yeah, it would have been really gnarly. It would have just been completely different. So I'm very blessed the way that things went. So
And I think it's really interesting too, Zach, what you alluded to, and um, the fact that all 3 of you guys are parents. I bet once you became parents, did you really have some perspective on, wow, I would, one of you alluded to it, I would never do this to my child. I would never treat my child like that. Did it give you more perspective on what you really did go through, even though it wasn't, you weren't like beaten every day and, again, someone said meth, there's no meth, but did it really make you think like, wow, I would never do these things to my child?
Yeah, I was going to touch
Oh, go ahead,
touch
Gary.
on just real quick to what Zach said, and that's a good litmus test is looking back at your parents. Could you imagine yourself doing the same thing to your own kids now that we're all parents ourselves? And I think also, if you notice, all 3 of us have kind of said, well, I don't know what everyone else, and so I think we're even worried about almost coming off as ungrateful for our own experience because we know how much worse, in some ways that people have it. Because we don't really think about how much better other kids might have it. We mostly think about how much worse when you're focusing on your own issue or your own childhood trauma. But it is unfortunate when you do look back and we'll just call this what this is, just kind of a crap fest on our dads, on our biological dads. But I mean, you look back and you kind of just know that, well, the only thing I learned from that figure is what not to do. And so that's something that's unfortunate when that's the only thing that you can look back on when you learn from all the people that were in your life.
And how to shave. That was, I think, the only thing I actually learned. The
Oh, yeah.
direction to shave. That's the only thing I remember learning.
I didn't grow a
How to
beard till I was
throw
like
a
30.
mean
So.
pitch.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it sounds like we're on the same page. It's kind of like comparing our experiences and comparing our trauma. And, my fiance also doesn't know her father. He left before she was memory age. And just she tells me, she's like, I'm glad I didn't have a dad based on the
yeah,
stories that you guys hear. So, again, everyone's kind of got their own path to forge. And I like what Zach said about letting someone else write your story, because I think this applies to men a lot for some reason, where we filter everything through our own experiences with our dads, because there's something about a father-son relationship, where we compare everything we do to who our father was, and even maybe what manhood is, or the idea of being a man is. And so, because that was supposed to be your example for what a man was supposed to be. And so it only doesn't only hit you on a parental level, questioning who you are as a parent, but who you are as a man as well.
Anybody else want to
I'll
go
jump
ahead?
in too. I think Yeah, I talk to Serena, my fiance, all the time about, like, I can't imagine saying half the stuff that we heard our parents say to us. And it's also a different time, right? Like, that's just also a normal thing. Like, if I talk to most people on the streets, they would say, like, oh, yeah, like my parents say, like, stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about. Like, when my daughter's crying, I want to nurture and see, like, what's wrong? Like, let's figure out, like, what's wrong. But instead of like dad, it almost felt like we were always a nuisance to him. It was always like, stop making noise. Like, it's, if we were like showing any sign that we were nearby, it was shut down like immediately. And that is something I'm always like, why did you, like, it was clear he didn't really want to have kids. So that's the, like, I think what came through in all of his actions. It was almost like he always would say things like, real men take care of their kids and stuff like that. So I think he felt that obligation, like he would lose part of his identity if he just took off, but he didn't want to be there. And so it was really clear that he didn't want to be there.
Yeah. I mean, just to back that up, I mean, I want to say, Garrett, that was really well said. And I really appreciate that. I lived with their dad as well for a little bit. And I experienced that as well. Like, it was always like a nuisance thing. Like, I could never really create a relationship with him or try to create a relationship or feel safe to create that relationship, because I guess you never really created that environment. So just based off that experience, I was like, whoa, it's nice to be able to create that environment, give your kids that nurturing environment, and embrace those emotions instead of push them away. Whereas it felt like their natural behavior was to push those emotions away. So it's kind of crazy to think like how some of us, just how we respond. And it's really nice to, like what Garrett said, is to look at them and try not to reflect that behavior, and like treat our kids the way that we want to treat them, like way better. It's a good example to look at. So, but yeah.
Yeah, and also looking back at it as an adult, especially if you have any, introspection, it's very easy to look back and look at your dad or look at someone in your life that might have not left the best impact on you as a demon or a monster, but they're not. They're human. He had great qualities too.
Absolutely.
He was a person, but the problem is that it got down to a point where, okay, I'm trying to redeem this person by trying to remember all his good qualities and all the things that he was and remember, but also you do get to a point where even your own parent, you get to a point where if you can't trust that person, and if there's been years and years of mistrust and abuse of trust, you do have to get to a point where you have to separate and look back and say, well, moving forward in this relationship with this individual is actually now going to harm more than help me as a person and whatever future kids I have at the time, future kids when we broke contact, now a present kid. And also looking back as an adult, since we all have our own families now and we're learning what not to do, but also what to do. And I just pity him because I know, like many people, you get into this cycle and where you just you've dug yourself into a hole that's too deep to get out of.
Absolutely, yeah. Or it's just a cycle of poor parenting that hasn't been broken, So you pity them because they don't know better. They're not aware of their actions, and what it can do to affect their child. But it's nice to be able to have that breaking point. And I do. But, he did have some great traits. He could definitely make a room laugh.
And the reason I think we broke contact with him wasn't because he was cheating or having all these affairs or doing weird Craigslist stuff. I don't know how much detail you've gone into, but he's a narcissist. The more I learn about narcissists, he's a sex addict for sure. And that's not why. Like, all of those things, none of us really, we cared, obviously, but like, I can only speak for me, but probably for Garrett too. Like, we had our own father son kind of relationship too from growing up. When he cheated on mom, then he met with Lizzie. Like, we're still like, okay. Then when he cheated on Lizzie, even I remember after that, I had already gone and done my own thing. I was in South Lake Tahoe living there, and I had texted him like, hey, I hope everything's okay. This was while we were still in contact. Like, hope you're doing okay. Like, just take this as an opportunity to work on yourself. And he was texting back like, oh yeah, like I'm like, are you seeing anyone else right now? He's like, no, I'm not seeing anyone. Like, I'm just trying to work on myself. And I'm like, good. Like, that's all we can ask. Like, and then come to find out he was on vacation with some fourth family's son while he was texting me that. That's why we broke contact, is all the lying, and where I'm like, why am I investing anything emotionally? And even like, this seems like, why are we giving him this much
Yeah.
attention? But because of that, those are the reasons we broke contact. Not because like, oh, he had an affair, oh, he was, even those things are redeemable if you're like, hey, I'm really working on this, like I have some bad tendencies and I'm trying to get better. All of us understand that, because we all suck in our own ways and we're all trying to work on our own selves. But that wasn't the case. It was just always like, I guess I'm just the worst person, I'm just a piece of shit, I guess no one's gonna love me anyway, so you guys don't care. Some manipulation and stuff that we just were like, all right, this is harming me, and nothing's true. You can't even trust if anything that he said was real.
Right. That was the lack of trust, and like what Jordan said, the self-pity was like daggers. I mean, you think of self-pity as something where you feel sorry for someone because they're going through something or whatever, but self-pity is a weapon, and he used that weapon, like, and it was sharp. And like Jordan's point too, I'll be honest, since we're speaking candidly, I questioned the productivity of this session. Like, what is the point of sitting together for an hour and just talking about how shitty our dad was? Like, what is this going to do? But I ultimately think that it is good to reflect in, and I've never done it in a group setting like this. It's always been on one-on-one or couch conversations. But it is nice to hear the other perspectives, especially with Zach, because I didn't know Zach, and I was out of the house by the time Dad and Lizzie were together, so I didn't really get to know the Rika boys too well, except when we would visit and stuff like that. So it's interesting to hear kind of his impact on another family too. And I'm like Jordan said, and Zach as well, it wasn't, oh, your dad has a, sex addiction, or your dad's cheating. I mean, I remember hearing that at sixth grade, when my mom sat me down and told me that your dad's been with another person. And I'm so naive, I thought he went to dinner. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, he went out with someone else? Like movies? Did he tip? Like all that stuff. But so I've known it for a long time. So that was never the thing. And I still like kind of, in a way, I feared him and idolized him at the same time. But, it's, so that's not even the thing. It's the things where you get to a point like, where you just cannot trust that person and you don't know that person. And the problem is when someone splits their lives into 10 different concurrent lives, like he had a tendency of doing, you didn't know which one of him you were getting.
Yeah.
You could get the cool dad, like, we took an Ireland trip together and we were both adults and I had a good time. I was drunk the whole time. He didn't care. That used to bother him. He was cool about it. But then, you get a completely different version of him when I was listening in the truck when he was outed from Mom and Lizzie by finding out that he had another family. So it's like you didn't know what version of him you were getting. It's the true Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, if you can come up with like 5 more names to go in that title.
Yeah.
That's really well said, Garrett. And all three of you. And I think that's why it was like people were curious, not just curious, but we come across a lot of people who suffer so much guilt of staying or leaving, the impact that it has on the children. And I think that was kind of why we went this avenue, not necessarily like there's an actual answer for everything, everybody, every circumstance, because nothing is a cookie cutter. And I could see why someone would say it was just a bashing on Rex, which I could see how that would be as well. But it's more, I think it's deeper than that. It's how do you move forward? How do you break those patterns? What words can you offer? Especially we get a lot of women that listen, a lot of women that we talk to who suffer so much guilt over these things. Do I stay? Do I go? Do I stay? Do I go? I mean, it's literally like the only thing they can perseverate on. And then they wonder, what's the impact it's going to have on my children if I leave? What's the impact it's going to have on my children if I stay? I mean, it's like a no-win situation. And I think that is the main question. If any of you had words of wisdom to talk to, and it could be man or woman in this situation that are going, do I stay or do I go? what words of encouragement would you offer? Not necessarily that you would have a specific answer to their situation, but maybe something that gives them hope and light to the benefit of staying or the benefit of going.
May I comment on this one?
Go for it.
So I kind of had a little experience with this recently with my father. I got to interact with him and have he wanted to get to know my son a little bit more and open up that, you know, that door in that realm. But I'm aware of the things that he did in his past life and things that he did while being with my mother. And I thought about all those things. I thought about all the great things like we mentioned before with our dads. Like there are great traits. There are things that come from them that we all acquire, you know, whether it's me or my brothers, we all acquire wonderful traits from our fathers, you know. So um there's wonderful things there. And that's what I kind of looked at the table. I was like, there's great things that maybe my son could benefit from my father, you know. Or and then I look at all the toxic and terrible tendencies and how he isolated himself and created a whole new life for himself. And is this something that I want to take the chance of my son having that exposure, you know? So it was really like making that decision. Do I give him that exposure or do I take him away? And I think it was a lot more beneficial to cut the communication off entirely because there's no reason to even put a little bit of poison into my son's life like that. So um, that's just my perspective and how I see it. But you kind of just have to remind yourself, is it worth it? Put the pros and the cons out there. And if the pros outweigh the cons, then you can trust your gut and trust your heart. So it's best I could say.
Thank you, Zach. Very, very well said. Appreciate that. Jordan, Garrett, do you have anything to offer on there?
Yeah, I would, unless Jordan cut me off if you want to jump in. I mean, to Lizzie's point, to shift into what can be learned from this as a growing experience. First thing I would say to your point about offering encouragement is that the nice thing about the strength of your own character is that even a person you've been around for 20 years who has might have driven your soul into the dirt, you still have strength of character to rise out of that. So no matter what, I mean, there's an amazing book. It's a very famous book from the 40s called Man's Search for Meaning. And it was written by Viktor Frankl. And he was in the Holocaust. He was a Jew and he was a very successful psychiatrist. And so he kind of mentally kept note of his experience during his time in I think it was Auschwitz he was at, and it was amazing just the depravity that he went through, where he was actually still able to look back at his own captors with like grace and sympathy. So even going through those experiences, and he was able to put him into one of the like what's considered one of the greatest nonfiction books in the English language. I don't know if it was the English language, so don't quote me on that part. But the point is that even going through 6 years or whatever in a concentration camp, and he was able to turn that experience into a book that changed a lot of people. So no matter what, no matter what kind of parent you have, physically abusive, emotionally, sexually, whatever, there's a lot that's in you that you're not aware of, and there's a lot that you can rise out of. So that's a word of encouragement, no matter what. Obviously recognizing these things is important, but the key is that if you love yourself, then you can really learn to love other people. And that was our dad's problem, is he hated himself. And when you hate yourself, it's that hatred seeps out. You don't keep it contained. But if you can actually start with loving yourself, and I struggle with that, obviously I'm ashamed of, we all got our own, stuff that we deal with, but it's easy to hate yourself based on your actions instead of who you are and in the inside. And so I would say just encouragement, loving yourself is a good start, because you won't be, even your own child, matter of fact, you might find yourself hating and resenting them more because of how much they remind you of you.
Mhm.
so there's that. And also, like I said, no matter what, just know that there's a lot of strength in you, I think, that we're not even aware of. That's not surface level obvious. So that would be something that I would point to, encouraging someone that if someone like Viktor Frankl can go through the Holocaust and look back and actually find uh, growth from that, and look back at his Nazi captors with grace and actually of love in a weird way, then you can make it through anything, as long as there's hope, as long as you still have that hope. So,
And I think um it's a tough question to ask. Like, should I like, if you're asking us like what's your advice on someone thinking should I stay or should I leave a marriage, like, I'm 30, I don't have an answer for that, and it's going to be case by case, obviously. And I can only speak to our experience. If there's sexual abuse, if there's physical abuse, like, get out. Obviously there's going to be, that's something, there's certain things. But with the emotional abuse, it's obviously such a spectrum, it's really hard. But would I have benefited from being pulled out of that marriage earlier? I think 100% yes. Because also, like, parents think that they can hide. They're like, oh, I shelter my kid from it. Like, no, you can't. Like, kids are very perceptive, and they've lived their entire life with you. So they know if something's wrong with you. They hear what you don't think they hear the yelling in the rooms all the time and the arguments and stuff. It's constant and it's obvious. And that's what they're looking at for a model of a relationship. So guess what? That's what they're going to find more than likely, unless, they're very much aware and like self-reflective to grow through that. But more than likely, that's what they're going to look for in a relationship as well. Where I have to fight that also, like certain tendencies that I have of like, no, this is a healthy relationship, this is an unhealthy aspect of a relationship. So if you're in an unhealthy relationship and you think that you're just going to hide it from your kids until they're older, you're not going to. You're just going to show them to unhappy people and say that you just stick it out because the Bible or whatever weird reason that you have, that's just my own opinion of our specific. Obviously it's so case by case, but with us, I think that's where I would land, is we probably would have benefited from seeing mom like overcome something, because obviously it was very evident that there was things going on all the time. We would have benefited from seeing her be strong and overcome something and put herself through something hard in order to get to the other side of something, positive, as opposed to just kind of sitting there through it and allowing all of it to happen. Not that you allowed it to happen, but you know what I mean. It's like, instead of waiting it out, like, or trying to shelter us from it, because none of us didn't know that things were going on. Like, why is mom sleeping on the couch? Like, it's never hidden.
Oh, that is so well said, Jordan, honestly. And um, it's funny because as a parent, you do look back and you think, I sheltered my kids because, even when, their dad was grumpy or, being mean or, about to go off on them for no reason, you would always, as a mom, shift the mood, or take them out of the house or, just try to make things happy. And you were always doing the dance, to balance things out and to make things good for your kids. And then you're on the other side in the room, with your spouse, like trying to remind them that parenting is a nurturing state. Parenting is not, you're going to yell at them just because you're annoyed, or you're going to yell at them because you had a bad day at work and you're tired, and they're not doing anything wrong, but you're in a mood. So therefore they're doing something wrong. And so you're on both sides, right? And you're trying to kind of mitigate everything. And you really do think that you sheltered your kids because, a lot of times your kids are too young to speak out and tell you, because they don't even know, like you all said, they don't know that they're in an abnormal or, you know, manipulative or emotionally, oppressive environment. They don't even realize, because to them that's normal. And so you guys nailed it on the head. So well said that, parents do think that if I stay in, it's better because then I can make everything okay for the kids and I can smooth everything out, and they still have their dad and they still have two parents. And again, we all know it's nuanced. We all understand that. Doesn't mean that everybody should go get a divorce at all, because every situation is different, but it's still great information to understand the basics that your kids do see and hear and know more than you have any idea that they know. Because even when my kids start talking about their past, I get so surprised and shocked that they knew that we were struggling financially, that they knew that I was unhappy, that they knew that I was trying to make things better, or that, things were just not right. And they were young kids at the time. So great points, you guys. Really good points.
I mean, I think it comes down to, and like Jordan said, there's a lot of there's a lot of reasons that people stay together that are not strong enough reasons to stay together. And of course, you have the inverse. There's a lot of people who break up just because they don't want to put, it's too hard. Because man, is it hard. I've only been in one for 5 years or whatever, and it's freaking hard, and it brings out the worst out of you at times, as well as the best out of you. But um, you do have to question, like, as far as, do I stay or do I go? I mean, you have to be honest with yourself and with the impact that this is having in your kid. Is staying together going to be better for this family, for my kids in the long run? Or is it actually going to be more detrimental? And be really honest. And, you say that with kind of an asterisk, because there's such a spectrum of when is someone having that conversation in their relationship. Some people can have that after one fight, in which case maybe you shouldn't be in that relationship if you're ready to call it quits after a big argument, because everyone's going to be grumpy. Dad's going to be grumpy at times, mom's going to be grumpy. So that's not really the problem. The problem is like, actually, is this going to is staying together because I'm worried about the fear of judgment of being a divorcee, or if I'm worried about being alone myself, or all the fears that come with separating from a partner and starting a new life. Is this actually going to be at the detriment of my kids? So it's complicated, and there's relationships are the messiest thing, probably. I mean, you could argue the messiest thing that a human can get oneself involved with is a relationship. Anything that's that satisfying and that rewarding is just by nature going to also be that hair-pullingly frustrating. You don't get the gold without the fire. So,
like kids.
yeah. So you really do, like, you got to I think being honest with yourself is really key, and I was listening to a podcast with the Jungian actually, this is the one that Jordan sent me, with a Jungian psychologist. And they were talking about marriage and how a lot of young 20 somethings or whatever, they get married not really because they're thinking about the future of their family. They get married because their goal was to be married. And when you're 20, you want a partner. But then 15 years down the road, you've got 3 or 4 kids, and that union is not what you thought you were getting into. And you realize that you didn't really want that. It was a temporary want. So, everyone's got to figure out what's best for them by being honest with themselves. And are you growing this family by staying together? Or are you actually being a detriment to the family by staying together? You got to be really honest with that fundamental question. And, I don't envy anyone who has to ask that question, because there's never a right answer. Welcome to life. Woo.
Well, and you're absolutely right. To me, families are messy. Bottom line, there's just no way around it, right? It's like dirty diapers are messy. So it's just, there is no cookie cutter. There is no simple answer. But I think it has to, and I think you guys have all said it, you have to really dig deep and say, what is the pros of staying and what is the pros of, or the cons of staying? And if the cons are, outweighing the pros of staying, then obviously reevaluating your life is definitely at the top of the list. Because as we've all heard it, and I know I've said this before, and it's just such an old cliche, when those oxygen masks come down, you first have to put it on yourself. And as a parent, we have to put it on ourselves. And if we're staying in a place that is totally lifeless and totally dead and causing nothing but destruction, the destruction will follow. And there's always the residual effect of how it affects our children, even as they are adults in their 30s, 40s, because they say you shouldn't be it's hard to be in a healthy relationship if you have not dealt with your childhood trauma. And I think the big impact is, as a parent, and I'm talking to the parent right now in these situations, are you keeping yourself in a place that is going to cause such trauma in your child's life in their 20s or 30s or 40s that they'll never have a healthy relationship. Is it worth it? I I don't think so.
No, I
And
agree. No, I 100% agree, Lizzie. But you know what? Did you know that your kids were suffering? I mean, did you actually know at the time? Because I don't know. I think that's the tricky part is that, I don't know if I even realized that they were really struggling. I mean, I knew that, I knew exactly. I knew what I saw, and I knew at times it was very serious, and there were some real severe situations that were extremely painful and hurtful, emotionally to the kids. But those weren't every day. And so, you guys, if any of you want to speak up on this, how would a parent know? Do you remember back when, you were just struggling, with, some of the things that were said to you, or some of the things, the behaviors, or I mean, I know one thing that, whenever the garage door would open, you all would disappear to your room, but I just wonder if, sometimes the kids just try to protect their mom too, and they don't want their mom to know they're sad. Or do you guys think that you didn't even know you were sad? Like, what would you say about that? Would a parent know if you all were, having a hard time, or do you think you just tried to make the best of it, or just thought it was normal? Do you have anything to kind of add on that?
I mean, I think it really depends, first of all, your age.
Mm.
I mean, yeah, at 16, you know what's going on. But when you're a kid, no. I mean, you're not thinking like, gee, I wonder what my parents are doing to mitigate this stressful environment. That's just not what you're thinking of. You're thinking of like, oh, because you believe it's something, think about it like this, is like if my dad was in a certain mood, or mom, whatever, like, and you were uncomfortable, you knew, or you trusted in that childlike state that it was for the right reason, that there's a reason, like, and that's the way it was supposed to be. They're mad because of ABC, unless you're actually, unless you're being your guardian as a clinically insane person, where they're actually, you don't even know what's causing their moods. Generally, as a kid, oh well, I I took more ice cream than I was supposed to. Dad got flow off the rail, but I knew better not to do that. So yeah, you didn't know what was the source of it, or why am I experiencing this trauma? You thought it was appropriate for whatever the setting is. Because one thing as a kid, when your when your family creates an environment that is just the norm, then you're not constantly questioning the healthiness of that environment. It's just, it is what it is. And that's why, and the proof is when if a kid who was raised in a very healthy household could come over and see your family's environment, that was not their norm. And they felt weird and they felt uncomfortable. So you're gonna, whatever environment you're in, that's your norm, especially as your kid, where you don't really have the powers to reflect on the appropriateness of your situation.
yeah, that's really good. I guess I'd piggyback also on what Dina said, and that was, how would you know if your children are suffering? And I think a good rule of thumb, and I'm not going to say this is an actual fact or anything, but I think for someone going through these things as a parent, I think if you are in so much emotional turmoil in that relationship, there is a very high percentage chance that your children are in turmoil. That, Dina, you and I did not realize that when our kids were little. But I guarantee that now, looking back, we both would say if the parent is in emotional turmoil, their kids are there as well.
Yeah, and just to piggyback a little bit, I'd say that it comes down to, you can see the fear in the kids' eyes. I know my mom saw the fear in our eyes. When I saw my brother get ripped out of a tub, right in front of me, straight into, dragged into the room, screaming at the top of his lungs, and I had no idea what was going on. It's those type of experiences that you're in fear. And my mom saw that. You could see the entire household was in fear. And there was no like question about it. Was this the right way or the wrong way? It was more of like, we know never to do something like that ever again. And yeah, I really do agree with Garrett. I think that it comes down to like as a kid, our perspective is, wow, I don't ever want to do what my brother just did because that's what's going to happen to me, you know. But as a parent that sees that and sees the fear in the children's eyes, there's already a scar deep enough in the kid that you know it's already been impacted, that's going to probably carry on for the rest of their lives, you know. So it just really comes down to how much scars do you want your kids to really feel? How many slashes do you want them to take until you feel like it's necessary to take them away? So I feel like it really comes down to, one, what's the situation? You know, are your kids taking a beating? Are they, you know, it really just depends on your scenario, you know, but and perspective. But yeah, so
Well said, Zach. Well said, Lizzie. Both of you. Really, really good points. Anybody want to jump on that? Jordan, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, when you said that, I tried to think, and I don't know. I have no clue. I didn't feel like, kind of like Garrett said, I felt like, oh, well, relationships are hard and people fight. And you just tell yourself what you need to tell yourself to feel better as a kid, because there has to be some balance. So you're just gonna say, oh, something's going on. This is why. And you hear from church or wherever, like, people making jokes about fighting with their wives all the time. So you're like, oh, this is completely normal. And then I don't know, it's hard to know. I mean, try to flip that power dynamic, and like, how would I feel about my daughter running away whenever mom came home? Like, that's something to consider. Like, if you're like, genuinely, we're both her like safe space, and when she cries or hurts herself, like, she just wants to be held by one of us. Like, to see, and obviously she's not a teenager, it's not, I haven't, it's been 3 years, so it's not going to be the same for the whole time, and I'm just only speaking on what I just known right now. But I think looking at that, seeing your kids not find any safe space in that person is a pretty good indicator, that maybe, and also I think you probably know deep down, if you genuinely are asking yourself, like, you probably know yourself if you need to get out. And if you have to convince yourself why not to all the time, it's probably a good indicator that you're just running away from what you know that you need to do. But like I said, it's so case by case. But I don't know. As a kid, I didn't know what was wrong. I didn't know if you can only look back and you're like, why am I crying every Thursday? But like, there's only certain, you can't really know at the time.
I think
Yeah.
one good thing you can do to ask yourself to, this is something that I realized, and probably around high school is when I started to realize this, is that I noticed I was very uncomfortable being alone with dad. I could be alone with grandma all day and have a blast. I could be alone with mom all day and have a blast. But even if I had to go to the store with my dad, just the two of us, I didn't know it. I didn't know it. I just thought it was normal. Or I just, it was a barely conscious thing. It was, I don't know if I'd quite call it subconscious, but it was there. I just had no idea until looking back, it's like, wait a minute, I don't feel that way when I go to the store with mom. I feel like that I can go a little crazy and just kind of be myself and be wild. I can't be myself with dad. So I think that's one thing you can ask yourself, like, if you are let's say a teenager or someone who's questioning this, it's like, do you feel uncomfortable with one of your parents when you're with them alone? As a family, it was different because you have all of our especially a large family like ours. You have all these personalities, and we're crazy. And when mom was home, that she was kind of dad's equalizer, and so she, kind of calmed him down a bit. And mom was the one beating the crap out of us with spatulas anyway, so it doesn't matter. So
You deserved every little spatula you got.
yeah. Anyways, but the thing was is that we weren't even though our dad never really spanked us. I don't think I can remember like two spankings maybe from dad, but we were not afraid of mom in the same way, and so we were comfortable with mom and comfortable enough to act up, which is probably why more spatulas came out. But like, I think that's something you can ask yourself, like, why do you feel comfortable being alone with a parent? Because you should.
yeah,
You should not feel uncomfortable or weird or awkward going to the store, with your dad.
yeah, yeah.
Hoping, like, just because with my dad, you know, particularly like anything, you're just trying to do anything you could not to like set him off for some way, and you didn't even know what you're doing half the time. But you know, it could be you're chewing your nails and that bothered him. So it's just really, it was very, it was very telling looking back. That's like, oh, I was very uncomfortable being alone with that parent.
And that alone, I feel like creates like bad habits for yourself going forward. Because like, you know, like people that you may look at maybe that remind you of your dad, you probably have a hard time even wanting to connect or maybe become personable or whatever the case may
Or
be.
yourself.
Yeah, or yourself,
Yeah,
precisely.
definitely yourself. That's the biggest
Yeah.
part is you think, am I this person? Am I a sex
Yeah.
addict? Am I every little thing that you do, you start to think like, am I a sociopath? Am I a narcissist? I mean, if you're if, like you should, I think, but
Yeah.
I think as you think way over the edge of like, is you're just so afraid of becoming that person.
Mm.
Yeah, there's a healthy and unhealthy version of everything. And so there's a healthy self-questioning and a healthy self-reflection. And then there's an unhealthy self-obsession and an unhealthy self-judgment, self-accusation, and self-hatred and all that stuff. So, and that's what's so confusing because it's easy to blur the lines between what's healthy and what's unhealthy, as far as working on yourself, or questioning yourself or reflecting on who you are. And yeah, so that, like I said kind of at the beginning, goes back to, it's like, oh, like, well, you're looking into yourself, you're like, I don't want to do anything that reminds me of that parent. I don't want to be, you know. So yeah, I think it's important to keep that in mind. Like I said earlier, remember you are your own person. You know, you're influenced by your parents, you're obviously raised in that they put you in the environment. Yep.
Well said, guys. I
Yeah.
don't know what Dina, did you have any other questions? Because I'm like still trying to process because I think each one of you said things so beautifully. And even though it's like, well, what do my words, uh, where will they go? I think they'll go a long way. I think your growth, your maturity, your wisdom is evidence in the words that you just spoke. And also your
Yeah.
healing as
Mhm.
well. And it gives hope in those
It's-
hopeless situations.
This was amazing. This was an amazing discussion. I know people are going to really glean from this. So thank you guys so much. I know your time is limited, but thank you so, so much for taking the time, just to share with us honestly and openly what it was like. And, I will just add one quick comment, listening to all of you, and this is for the parents out there that are trying to decide what to do and trying to figure out, if even just somebody who isn't smacking their kids around or doing serious things, but they're just emotionally just always either unavailable or in a bad mood, or, I believe that it starts to make your children feel like they were just bad. If dad got mad for you chewing your nails, well, then I was just a bad kid for doing it. If dad got mad because you were laughing and playing and happy, as a bad kid in the bathtub situation, Zach, whatever happened in the bathtub, like you said, you just decided to be, I better be the good kid, and I feel like that right there is its own very quiet form of covert abuse because you leave these kids who are just kids and who are just doing kid things feeling like everything and anything they do is wrong and bad. And now they have to go through their life trying to decipher what really is bad and what isn't and what's okay. And that's got to be torture,
I think
to always.
we were shamed a lot, and that's a big thing. I think dad, I noticed that a lot of these people, like dad would always, and now I don't feel I have to work through myself of like, am I a good person? Because like there's shame, which is I'm a bad person, and there's guilt, which is I did something bad. Guilt is what you should feel when you do something bad, but I think dad would always, or in specific cases, always shame us. Like this is who you are. This is why you're doing this. Why would you do this if that's not who you were? Like that kind of thing. So I think that's such a horrible, like I think that's a big indicator or a tell of someone who's unhealthy is they're shaming people a lot.
There's an amazing scene in that movie Tree of Life, which is a heavy movie, but I'll always remember it because Brad Pitt plays a very stern, overbearing, emotionally abusive father, and he lost his son, spoiler alert. And when he was looking back on his son, and he had a breakdown because he was crying because he let he was reflecting on what Jordan just said, where he said that poor boy, he's like, I made him feel shame and I made him feel my shame. He's like, I would criticize the way he turned the page when he was playing piano. He's like, I would, so just the littlest thing. And he had this moment of reflection where he realizes that the shame that he was putting on his kid was his own shame. And like I said earlier, it's not gonna be self-contained. When there's self-hatred, self-shame, you're not just your kids, your partner, the people that are closest to you and most important to you, it's like an infection spreading to the heart. I mean, it's gonna go right towards whoever is closest to, um, which is why it's so important to be aware of it. Yeah, so that's just an aside.
Wow. Okay. Wow. I learned a lot today. I really did. I think this is going to be extremely helpful, you guys.
Where do we get our checks?
Your checks are in the mail.
Thank you,
Okay.
Garrett, for the comedic relief. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. This was fantastic.
Yes.
Really
thank you.
appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. It was surprisingly cathartic. So
Well, that's good.
Yeah. Love you all.
We love you
guys.
too.
Oh, we love you
and
too.
And in closing, I would like to say that for those that are listening, we appreciate each and every one of you. If you have any words to say or share with any of these, Jordan, Garrett, Zach, or all three, feel free to reach out to us through our website, thematadoras.com. You are able to listen to all our podcasts under the Matadoras.
Buy our merch.
Yeah. And then we also have our YouTube channel. But just know at the end of the day, we do care deeply about each and every one of you. You are not alone in this journey through recovery of abuse or in your abusive situation. And know that your children are not alone as well. And we thank you very much.
bye.
Toodaloo.